So one of the most interesting chapters of the Lost River Cave site is that it's actually camped on by both the Confederate and the Union soldiers. The Confederates came in 1861, and they came and they feared that the Confederates, of course, would seize some of their cattle and horses, so they tried to hide their livestock in the cave. The Confederates actually decided to camp in Lost River Cave, so that didn't work very well. And so the Confederates used the cave as a natural hideout and a cool place to stay. There are some interesting stories regarding the Confederate soldiers. It has been said that at fall of 1861, there was this wagon of supplies coming in to the Confederate soldiers, and unfortunately, the horse must have tripped, and the horse fell in the water, and so did the wagon, and it all disappeared. The only thing ever found was the hat floating on top of the water. A similar incident happened to occur with the Union soldiers later on in 1862, when the Union soldiers, thinking that it was hot and they wanted a dip, started to go in. So one of the soldiers jumped in, and unfortunately he kind of screamed and cried and went underwater, and another soldier jumped in to save him, and he disappeared. The third soldier jumped in and disappeared, and then the rest figured out that this was probably not working, and the rest fled. All along these trails you might see some powder houses. These are very small, isolated buildings made out of thick stone for obvious reasons. This is where they used to store their gunpowder. You can see along one of the sides, at least, of one of these powder houses is a black scorch mark where the powder apparently exploded, some fire damage. So that's several little isolated places because they didn't want them all together where the powder would blow up all at once. There's also something called the Honeymoon Suite. It was the only shack on the property that had electricity, and it was also built on the very edge of a bluff that overlooked the cave and Lost River. This was all a very romantic scene, but it was also joked upon that if you and your new spouse had an issue and realized you really weren't compatible, all you'd have to do, give them a little push, and down they go. Another thing the cave was used for a little bit later in the 1930s was it was used for some nightclubs. It was used for tourism. Somebody bought this area and thought it would be a great idea because 31 West was a very busy highway back then. So they used to have nightclubs and alcohol down in the cave, and it was the world's only air-conditioned bar at the time. So they would have lots of dancing, they'd have lots of music. The only problem was that they would not allow the alcohol to be sold underground for some reason. So they would have to buy the alcohol up at the top of the bluff and then go down the stairs. And the other problem is after you've had a few drinks, going back up the stairs might have been a little bit of an issue.